Hey, what is up, fellow geeks and nerds? Welcome back to another Nerd Informants film review. I am a nerd, and I'm Josh Wisham.
And I'm Tim Church, and I'm also a nerd.
Welcome to review number 2, as Tim and I went over to Branson Meadows Cinemas to check out the film that we all need right now, a powerhouse movie, and it packs an emotional wallop to boot. A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood from director Marielle Heller. It's got a great cast, led by the man who you've seen all across social media, all across the trailers, looking exactly like the man he portrays in Fred Rogers, led by Tom Hanks. Matthew Rhys is Lloyd Vogel, also in the movie, and Chris Cooper, veteran actor, playing Jerry Vogel. And of course, this is the story, the life and times of the man who is a hero to children everywhere, Fred Rogers. What is the story all about, sir?
Yeah, this movie takes place and is based on the true story of a real-life friendship between Fred Rogers and journalist Tom Junod.
You know, and the best part about this is the movie. When I say it's the movie that we all need right now, we needed a movie that was going to come along, that was going to pull on the heartstrings and tell a rich story, one that was really about the dialogue versus all of the action and the explosions. This movie is a quiet film from start to finish. You had to keep the theater quiet just so you didn't miss a single thing. But I want you to start because honestly, I feel as often as you talk about Fred Rogers and how important Fred Rogers is to you personally, I feel like this is the movie that you were almost born to review. This was a special one for you, really.
Yeah, it really is. Mr. Rogers has been a longtime hero of mine. I grew up watching Mr. Rogers, as many people did. But he always kind of had I guess we always had a weird connection to him, or between the two of us, because even as an adult, he still believed in the power of imagination and the wonder behind it, and, you know, bringing Trolley to life and the land of make-believe to life, and Daniel and King Friday the 13th and the rest of the gang was just a Trolley right away. And as someone who actively kept their imagination going through their teenage years and was ridiculed for still playing with action figures to this day, you know, I always felt a certain connection to Mr. Rogers because it doesn't matter how old you are, your imagination is something that should continue to grow. And that's a lesson he taught me, and it's one I value as a person today, and I think it comes to use being a nerd informant. So getting to see this film finally take place, the day that they announced Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers was you know, it was a speechless day, honestly, because I wanted to see this for such a long time, and no one has ever attempted to bring Mr. Rogers' story to life. And the fact that we got to see a glimpse of it in this film was very emotional for myself, as I imagine it is for millions of other people. But the way Tom Hanks did what he did, you know, it's hard to put words behind. He just did a beautiful job. It was just beautiful.
The moment that he stepped through the door on the soundstage in Pittsburgh, he sang the song, he changed the shoes, he put on the red sweater. He was Mr. Rogers. He just disappeared into the role, and that's a rare thing for an actor to do in film. Mm-hmm. Tom Hanks, as we all know, the story's out there by now, that, you know, he got a very pleasant surprise through ancestry or whatever it was, that he is like fifth or sixth cousin removed from Fred Rogers, and so that's such a unique aspect, and that just adds to what this movie is. But I want to stress to you guys that when you go and see this movie, it might be misbilled just a little bit, because you may go into it expecting it to be a biopic, and it's a full story about Fred Rogers, and that's what Tom Hanks' role is in this movie. That's not what this movie is. It is about a relationship. It is about a friendship, probably unlikely in many facets, that was not expected to happen, but this is what you see. This is the friendship. This is about a man, Lloyd Vogel, that is portrayed by Matthew Rhys. Obviously, this is Tom Junod that we're talking about here as the journalist in real life that Fred Rogers came to befriend. And Matthew Rice, he has to play a very difficult character because this is a guy that works for Esquire magazine, and his character is very flawed. I mean, obviously, I think early on in his life had problems with alcohol, and this comes from a very tenuous relationship, an estranged relationship with his father, who was abusive, absentee, left him and his mom when his mother took ill and was on the verge of death. This guy just disappeared on him. And so there's a lot of anger, a lot of resentment there. And that's where it starts, because you see Mr. Rogers in the movie introduce his friend, this reporter, Lloyd Vogel. And the picture is he's all scarred, he's got this scar on his nose, and then we learn the story and we learn how it comes down. And Lloyd's boss charges him with going out and doing this profile on heroes. And who does he get assigned to? Fred Rogers. And nobody really would want to work with Lloyd Vogel because, as you learn in this movie, Lloyd Vogel is really this combative investigative reporter. He's just got a reputation. Nobody wants to work with him. Nobody wants to sit down for an interview with him. The one man that does is Fred Rogers.
Yep.
And there's a very special reason behind that, because I think you might say this best, is that Fred Rogers, no matter who you were, child or adult, Fred Rogers was the type of man that could see the best part of you, regardless. And that's special. That's what made him stand out.
No, without a doubt. Fred Rogers was an unusual man. Many people would bill him as unusual if they saw him on the street, if they saw him in person, if he had never had a PBS children's show and just got to meet Fred Rogers at the grocery store. I imagine that he would have been billed as a very odd and unusual man. And Tom Hanks really does that justice. He really brings that to life. He really showcases the uniqueness of who Fred Rogers was. And through Matthew Rice's performance as Lloyd Vogel, you're able to see that uniqueness and that curiosity that Mr. Rogers had for everyone that he met. And I think this movie needed to have that type of relationship going for you to really get the full scope of who Mr. Rogers is and who he was.
You know, and one of the things that I really enjoyed was, too, is that Fred Rogers in this movie, as we get to know his character more and we get to know the backstory behind Lloyd Vogel, what I really enjoyed was the fact that Fred took a specific interest in Lloyd's life. And the painful parts of Lloyd's past, Fred wouldn't let go. He was always asking him, what happened? Why did you fight with your father? And as this develops, Lloyd learns to let his pain go, because as he goes into this story, one of the greatest scenes is when he tells his wife who he's going to go and profile. The one thing that Lloyd's wife says to him is like, please do not ruin my childhood. Because Lloyd goes into this thing and he's skeptical. He does not believe that Fred Rogers is who he says he is. He thinks he's a fraud. He thinks he's skeptical. And goes in at one point, and as this movie goes along, he just says, he's like, he's the nicest guy I've ever met in my life.
And as a journalist, I can go ahead and point out, I mean, clearly in this film, Lloyd was looking for dirt on Mr. Rogers. He wanted
the quick story, right?
He wanted a quick story, but he wanted to... That he's an investigative reporter, so he's there to find the bad in the situation. And as a journalist myself, I can say that oftentimes that's what we're looking for in certain stories. It's very hard to find the good in the world anymore. And clearly with the type of writing that Lloyd was used to, finding the good in someone like Mr. Rogers, who spent his days playing with puppets and working on a television show in Pittsburgh, I mean... sounds like a lovely man, but, you know, being a journalist as Lloyd was, digging up dirt was what he was after, and it's through that storyline that I feel like we really got to see who Lloyd was, but we also got to see who Mr. Rogers was, and the caring, compassion, understanding, curious Mr. Rogers as he really was by his care and commitment and interest in what Lloyd's story was. And I think Matthew Rice did a beautiful job with this role. And it kept bothering me why I recognized him, because he's not really been in too much stuff, but most recently he was in the movie The Post with Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep. And he had a smaller role in there, but he was in the film, and so he kind of stuck out to me. But he also very much looks like stand-up comedian Mike Birbiglia. So anybody watching this that knows who Mike Birbiglia is, I want you to look at a picture of Mike and look at a picture of Matthew and tell me that they are not brothers, because they look very, very much alike. But of course, Chris Cooper's in this film. We've not talked about him yet.
Yeah.
Chris Cooper, you got to talk about how great he was.
Chris Cooper, I mean, obviously he's a veteran actor. He has been in a lot of movies, and Chris gets to play a media role as Lloyd's father. Again, these two are estranged, and basically, I will say this: Jerry is a very flawed man. Obviously, alcoholism, child abandonment, spousal abandonment, you name it. He tries to get back in his son's life, and this goes down at a wedding that they're at. This is where this whole thing kind of gets started. Difficulties abound right there, and he tries to reconnect with his son during this movie, but you can just see just his brashness, his abrasiveness. He's not exactly the most loving guy. Even towards the end of the movie, he really doesn't change a whole lot, but I mean, he comes to realize, hey, you know, I'm getting close to the end. I wish I hadn't waited this long to turn things around and be what you needed me to be. And there's some very touching moments towards the end of the movie that I won't spoil, but as the two of them come back together, both Jerry and Lloyd, it really is something special to see, because you get to see the emotional range that Chris Cooper gets to display in this particular movie. He has a great moment with Mr. Rogers in the movie, which I think you guys will really, really like. But the father-son dynamic is portrayed well. Lloyd's anger with his dad, the reasons why, and the reasons why they come together in this movie are well written and well done. I will say that. So I think there's going to be lots of like there. You got this veteran actor as Chris Cooper in the film, and he fits very, very well in the story. But there's a lot to like. And it left Tim and I leaving the theater going, you know, I mean, obviously you come in expecting one type of a movie, it's something different, and you want more. You want Tom Hanks to step back into this role as Fred Rogers and maybe give us a biopic.
Yeah, and here's the thing, and this is the biggest fault that I have with this film, and like you said earlier, it was mismarketed, it was misbilled. People are definitely going to be going into this film thinking that they're going to get to see the history and life of Mr. Rogers, and that's not the case in this film. Now, those of us who did our research in advance knew what that was and knew what that film was going to be, but I feel like while it was important to tell this story, I feel like there's so much more of Mr. Rogers' story that we did not get to see on this film. His beginnings, his ends, the in-betweens, the
interaction with kids.
Yeah, the interaction, the importance that he had to the history of public television programming and children's programming. We only got to see, micro amounts of that in this film. And so, yeah, I want nothing more than Tom Hanks to don a cardigan again and step into the shoes of Mr. Rogers. And, we got to see, like Mr. McFeely, we got to see a gentleman play him who I haven't had the chance to look up to see who was playing him, but he did a fantastic job. And we got to see a couple other of the characters, but there's so many characters who were repeating characters in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood that we didn't get to see on this film. So there's just so much information that could be put together, and I'm really hoping that after this film has seen the success that it has in opening weekend and what I imagine will be some long-term success in the theater, that they're heavily going to consider letting Tom Hanks come back to play Fred Rogers and do a reflection of who he is. And, I've not had the chance to talk to you about this, but, clearly you got Mr. Rogers in his older life. Tom Hanks is in his 60s. So who better to play a younger version of Mr. Rogers than Tom Hanks' son, Colin? I would very much like to see Colin Hanks slick his hair over to the side, jet black hair, and put on a cardigan sweater as a young Mr. Fred Rogers. I think that would work very, very well.
It could work, and I look at a misbilling. I don't think it is a total mistake, because what if you look at it as this, the movie was misbilled, but what if it reignites interest in the life of Fred Rogers? Because there are other stories that you can find on PBS. If you go up and you pick up the vintage box sets, go back and rewatch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. If you introduce your kids to Fred Rogers and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhoods, I think the misbilling is a victory in that regard. If it exposes more people and ignites that curiosity to go back and explore Fred Rogers' life, then that is a win. It's the movie that we need right now, given the state of things all across the world. It's something that's going to be a bright spot in your life this holiday season. Go ahead and give it a score, my friend.
I don't have too many faults with this film, so yeah. 10 red cardigan sweaters out of 10.
I liked what I saw. I want more. I enjoyed the story. It hit every emotional beat that I wanted to see. Great acting from all the lead characters in this film. I liked it. I'll stay with Tim. I'll go ahead and give it 10 Fred Rogers out of 10. A beautiful day in the neighborhood indeed. So go and see it.
Please.
Branson Meadows Cinemas or your cinema of choice. Please dive deep into the life of Fred Rogers. You will not be disappointed. Reviews are presented by Branson IMAX Entertainment Complex, supported by Brian M. O'Neill at Ozarks Marketing Group, LLC. The team at the Sign Man and Hollister, thanks to the Blahas, the owners and proprietors of Comic Force at the shops at Branson Meadows, White River Design Company, and of course, friends, 1984 Arcade in the shops at Branson Meadows. We've got more reviews coming your way as we get into the month of December and Christmas time here in Ozark Mountain Country. You think about Star Wars, it's right around the corner. We've got a big time conversation coming your way on that one and so much more. Until we see you next time, fellow geeks and nerds, be informed.